My comparative film project pertains to the differences and similarities between two psychological thriller movies, Get Out, a 2017 film by American Jordan Peele, and La piel que habito, a 2011 movie directed by Spanish Pedro Almodovar. This study is justified because Get Out concerns American racial tensions in the 2010s, while La piel que habito communicates the situation of Spanish women in 2011, subject to the patriarchy. Both of these films have different cultural contexts. As defined by Masterclass staff, thrillers are tension-filled stories that are not predictable, and they become psychological thrillers by having the suspenseful story deal with questioning and understanding the motivations, feelings, and minds of humans, while having themes of mystery and morality. Thrillers create their tension through suspense. Suspense being defined by Barsam and Monahan as the anxiety brought on by a partial uncertainty, where the audience desperately wants to help potential victims from the danger they know the character is approaching. Indeed, the movies La piel que habito and Get Out both explore the motives of crazed doctors and the minds of their respective victims while having their protagonists attempt to escape in suspenseful scenes. In Peele's movie, his black protagonist Chris goes to the American suburbs with his white girlfriend's white family and white friends. Peele's movie is addressing the social political African American experience with racism in the US, as all of Chris' hosts look at him plainly for his race with the intention of taking his own body from him, horrifyingly trying to place a white man's brain in control of his healthy black body instead. In contrast, Almodovar's film is set in Spain, and it addresses the patriarchal system and the commodification of women that Almodovar notes in Spain. La piel Cabito creates its thriller aspect by having this crazed, almost Frankenstein-like doctor manipulating and toying with the body of the protagonist from the start. This film plays out the story of a former man, Vicente, who had his sex forcibly converted and goes on to fight for escape from his captor, Robert. Now, Veracruz, already having his body taken away from him, is protesting in each way he can. The effect cultural context plays into the creation of either psychological thriller is present in the narrative structure of each film, the close-ups, camera angles, as well as the costume design, used to create distinct but equally important social messages. Each film's respective storytelling structure was chosen to contribute to each movie's distinct social message. The American film uses the typical Hollywood three-act structure to open, develop, and resolve the entire story linearly. There are recognizable parts to depict Chris as vulnerable to the white perpetrators, representing the African-American experience of microaggressions from white people. The narrative is linear to represent the path of dealing with passive racism, where first it is hidden, then questioned, and ultimately battled. Notable points of the debate section in Act 1, where in this thriller Chris weighs out if he should go to this imperfect situation of his girlfriend's parents' household, while Rose is luring him into the trap the Armitage house is.
Do they know I'm black?
No.
The midpoint in Act 2 is where the evil of the situation is revealed. Here, it is represented by Logan yelling at Chris to get out.
Get out. Sorry, man.
Okay.
Get out! Yo! Yeah! Yo, shoot!
But preceding the violence, there are hints that the white guests were entirely focused on Chris's race, not his humanness.
Do you find that being African American has more advantage or disadvantage?
The climax of Act 3 is Chris fighting his way out. Their racist eugenics plan is entirely revealed, so he proceeds to kill the entire Armitage family in self-defense. In contrast to a linear three-act structure, however, the Spanish film uses a broken or fractured narrative structure where it jumps between current events and the context of those events through flashbacks. The fractured narrative connects to the cultural context of Spanish patriarchy because the complexity of the structure represents the complexity of patriarchy, how each action is contextualized by the social complicity with an unjust system. Masterclass has said that a non-linear story creates intrigue, a puzzle that requires more engagement with the individual pieces of the story. This invitation for more engagement comes with the introduction of an imprisoned woman so the audience pays attention to why Veracruz is held captive, how Vicente was drugged and forced to a sex reassignment surgery for Robert's revenge since his daughter committed suicide because of Vicente, has an even deeper, twisted layer once it is revealed that Veracruz looks exactly like Robert's past wife and has the fireproof skin Robert made that would have saved her from being disfigured. Compared to the multi-layered patriarchal structure that culturally, politically, and economically keeps women powerless, we see similarities between the spiderweb of the story and the hand of patriarchy that is interwoven into Spanish society. Moreover, to build on the social messages, close-ups are utilized to focus on the victims of each social dilemma, but in different manners with each film. Close-up shots are characterized by how the frame is filled by the actor, normally intimately displaying the character's emotions by framing their face. In Peele's film, close-ups are important considering they were heavily present in the trailers promoting the movie. In Get Out, close-ups are important to convey the fear of being black surrounded by white people. In this scene, as Chris is hypnotized and paralyzed, the straightforward close-up shot is powerfully conveying the fear in his eyes as he is completely vulnerable to his white hostess, eyes being a big motif for the movie. Censor framed, we see how Peele is guiding us in this shot and other close-ups to the idea of seeing the world through Chris's eyes, the black perspective. As a black man, being vulnerable to white eyes is a typical occurrence. Even in 2020, 3 years after the movie's release, according to The Hill, across many jurisdictions in America, black people are arrested 5 to 10 times more often than their white counterparts for the same crime. In this scene, even though Chris was not driving, the white cop asks for his ID, which he immediately complies with because he has the American cultural context to let him know it is easier to comply than to face harsh punishments. Close-up shots are used in this film to offer insight into the black perspective with racism, reasonable fear. Almodovar's film, La piel que habito, uses close-up shots similarly to shed light on its country's social issue, the patriarchal structure present in the 2010s, but in contrast to Get Out, the close-up shots objectify women. In this movie, the characteristic of close-up shots displaying emotions is ignored. Instead of focusing on Vera's emotions, the focus of the close-ups is on her body. Almodovar is subverting the typical male gaze in film by using it for social commentary. Studio binders Kim Leonard has said that overly exaggerating the male gaze is a way to subvert it. Certainly, having the male gaze blatantly fixate on the body of a transgender woman is a surprising twist for audiences, since transgender people are not well represented in media. Leonard has defined the male gaze using Laura Mulvey's writing as the perspective of the heterosexual male fantasy. In filming, the male gaze is represented by the camera. It lingers over the female body in ways meant to titillate both the male protagonist and the audience. It frames the female body in sections and dehumanizes her. This definition perfectly fits here, as the mirror cuts off her head, and here, where she is practically reduced to wall art for Robert's enjoyment. Close-ups are used in this film to critique the patriarchy through its overemphasis on the male gaze. Similar to the function of close-ups, the cinematographic choice of low or high angles is part of the commentary. In Get Out, low angles are used to create fearful atmospheres, but also used to refer to the old ideas of the Jim Crow structure. In an interview with CBS, Peele notes that his project was his opportunity to
bring a piece of the conversation I'd never seen put on film before. I felt like there was this void in the way we talk about race.
and how he has
Felt like racism was not being called out sufficiently enough.
Just as Almodovar was blatantly portraying the male gaze, Peele is mimicking how, under Jim Crow, African Americans were related to the status of second-class citizens, and instructed to metaphorically and or physically look up to their white counterparts in society. In this iconic scene, the low-angled close-up on Georgina is one of the subtle hints riddled in this movie that the black people Chris awkwardly interacts with are in fact white people in those bodies, because Georgina's character is all but physically white. When the scene switches to Chris's point of view of her, the camera and Chris look up to her. In contrast, the angle and perspective are switched when addressing La Piel Cabito. The angled shots are from above and display Robert's, the man's, the perpetrator's perspective. Likewise, using the outdated ideas of an oppressive structure, here the camera and Robert are looking down on the new Veracruz. Throughout the movie, the power was in Robert's hands, and this is cemented in how Robert is shown with low angles, which typically shows how his character has relative superiority over Veracruz, who is depicted with high angles. As writer Liz Cooper says, 3 years after the release of La Piel Cabito, from the law of succession to domestic violence, from political representation to the judiciary and the boardroom, from pay to reproductive rights, gender equality in Spain remains a distant goal. The emphasis on the male gaze is exhibited with an entire flight of stairs between the characters, where Robert looks completely down on Veracruz, further critiquing the patriarchy through this overemphasis that leads to a subversion of the male gaze. Lastly, each film's costume design, part of the mise-en-scene, has more than just a surface meaning. In Get Out, the costumes of the characters were curated to bring another message about discriminatory structures. Here, it is a political message surrounding racism. In this scene, Nadine Haters, the costume designer of the movie, states in a Vogue interview that the team purposefully wanted Chris and Rose to look like the all-American couple, paired to represent the U.S. flag's colors of red, white, and blue. Amy Welton of Radboud University has determined that the colors each character wears is so that they can be related to a political party using their typical colors. The protagonist wears blue and his girlfriend wears red, obvious connections to the American Democratic and Republican parties. Republicans are generally against affirmative action for racial minorities, favorability, which would benefit said minorities, while Democrats are generally more sympathetic towards racial minorities. Here, Chris wears the blue because he is the minority, while Rose wears the red because she is dangerous to him. Interestingly, the color gray ties to an older political party, the Old Confederacy. These specific white party attendees adorn gray vests. It foreshadows the racist sentiments they have in their scenes, as they are in fact potential buyers of his body as a host, connecting back to the Old Confederate Party's large practice of slave trading. As Welton points out, gray was the color of the racist Confederate uniform from the 1860s. The attire chosen for this American movie's characters connects back to specifically American politics. In a similar fashion, the close of Almodovar's film connects to the film's cultural context of Spanish patriarchy. Veracruz is layered in first Robert's smooth, scientifically made durable skin, and then has a creamy, tight-skinned leotard. Both layers are connected to the male gaze idea of perfection. Her imperfections are smoothed out with a rich, creamy skin that omits the pink quality of normal flesh, as noted by writer Peter Bradshaw, so that she is completely objectified, removing all characteristics of her humanity. In addition, Robert's operation that replaces all of Veracruz's skin with what he made creates the idea of ownership. The man owns the woman, and she is his trophy. Veracruz becomes his science project to show off, as his trophy wife has all the beauty that he created with his own hands. With Robert's attire as well, him representing his wealth through the home he lives in and the fine clothes he wears, there is further connection between the costume design and the context of Spanish patriarchy. Under the system, Robert is believed to have the power and right to own her beauty and body with his high-class status. These two films are both great exhibitions of how directors can use their art form to bring attention to the right things in their societies. In this study, the directors found it best to create their messages in the exciting psychological thriller genre. Jordan Peele focused on how white people react with black people in America, highlighting the evil of microaggressions, while Pedro Almodovar shed light on Spain's outdated patriarchy with its restrictive and oppressive perspective on gender roles.